Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone that has joined us today. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the May 2020 Epsilon Sigma Phi webinar hosted by the Professional Development Committee. We are happy to see that so many of you could participate today. My name is Jeanette Ray Keywood, and I serve as the ESP Professional Development Committee Chair. If each of you would take a moment to drop your name and institution in the chat box so we know who we have with us today. Our presentation will be proceed with caution, the when, where, and how of extension engagement. Our presenters, Turdy Rice, Program Leader Coordinator, Community Vitality from Kansas State, and Bruce Chladny, former Extension employee and currently Executive Director for Kansas Association of Counties, are our presenters for today. Just a little housekeeping before we start. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the National ESP website along with other webinars that we have offered and will be offering. All of the participants are on mute during the presentation. However, you may use the chat box to ask questions or make statements during the webinar. There will be time at the end of the webinar for our presenters to answer questions that you might have. So, without further ado, I will turn the time over to our presenters, Turdy and Bruce.
Thank you, Jeanette. As Jeanette shared, I'm Turdy Rice, and I'm a member of the Alpha Rho chapter from Kansas. I do want to do a shout out to Jennifer Wilson, who is also with our Alpha Rho chapter and on the same committee that sponsors the webinars, for providing some backup. Bit about my history. I've basically spent my career with Extension. And have spent about the last 14 years dedicated to community vitality programming. And during my time, I had an opportunity to serve as the Extension Fellow to the National Association of Counties. And so that's where I really got my background in how do we engage the public? What is Extension's role in engaging the public as we deal with some of the wicked or very controversial issues that we deal with today. And so speaking of the Association of Counties, Bruce, do you want to introduce yourself?
I sure will. Well, good morning and good afternoon, like everybody is saying. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. It's great to be back amongst Extension friends and professionals. I've been away for just a few months, but as Turdy had introduced, I'm Bruce Chladny, and she actually hired me on back in 1999 to be a part of her crew there at Douglas County in the Lawrence area of the K-State Extension system as a horticulture extension professional. Before that, I had been in the Kansas City area, and then actually I got my roots started in the University of Florida down in Escambia County, Florida. So I'm looking at the chat box over here, and I'm seeing a bunch of IFAS folks, so welcome to you all. But after leaving Douglas County, I went back to Wyandotte County to Kansas City, where I became the extension director there, and also, like Trudy, did community vitality work. And then about 4 years ago, Trudy had approached me to do a project, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that project here in a few minutes, to do some leadership training for volunteers. And we call that the Extension Master Volunteer Facilitator Training Program. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but that kind of took my attention away from the overall leadership of the office, and I focused solely on leadership development then. And then back in September, it was time to do something different, and that's when I joined the Association of Counties here in Kansas. And so it's been quite a learning curve to see all the different things that are going on outside of the world of extension. And then, of course, with COVID-19 basically shutting down a lot of these county governments, it's been very interesting to see what my colleagues around the country are doing to address the issue. So it's quite fun, it's quite exciting times, but it's also very sad and tragic times, if you will, as well. So, but with that, Trudy, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and you can get us started.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. As Bruce alluded to, it's a different world today than it was when we actually made the application for this seminar. But I want to say that as we deal with some of these wicked issues, even though they're a little different today than we might have imagined 10 weeks ago, and we have no idea what they might look like even 10 weeks into the future. Extension historically has been helping people solve their problems at the local level, and we've primarily done that through education. So the types of things we're going to talk about today, and you're going to have an opportunity, we're going to use the chat box today for you to do your sharing with, and Bruce will lead some of those. But this type of work that we're talking about in getting involved in public issues, I don't know, if there's some of you that have been around for a while, we go back to the time that we had the public issues education, or it was called PI. And I referred back to that and took some information out of that. I also did a search of Journal of Extension and noticed that some extension programs have some policies and procedures, Kentucky particular, and on engagement in this. And so we're going to talk about really what's your role as an extension professional in getting of this. But before that, I want to say this is not easy work. And so you need to proceed with caution. There will be challenges, I guarantee you, as you work in these arenas, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions. There's times that I have had to say, wait a minute. If I was wise early on, I would say, I don't think that that is an appropriate role. Many times in this type of work, you'll get partway down the road and you'll have to say, pause, I think I need to step away, or I think there's another better person for this. So today what we're going to do is start with why, and then we're going to talk about who should be involved, what is appropriate, when is it appropriate, and where is it appropriate. And then Bruce is gonna finish us off with a tool that's available through Kansas State Research and Extension that we're happy to share with our colleagues across the nation. And that's the how do we do that. So Bruce.
Okay. Like Trudy had said, this is going to be a little bit interactive. We're going to give this a shot. Looks like we've got about 50 participants on board, which is perfect. What I'd like for you to, for those that are joining us, hopefully on your computer screen, that's great, type it in. For those of you that are, if we have anybody just joining in by phone, then this probably isn't going to work very well for you. But I want to get a kind of a rough survey of what roadblocks prevent you from doing what you really wish to do related to community engagement. So as you're contemplating, as you sit here today, and as we start thinking about, well, I want to get involved, I want to be a part of this process, whatever that might be, an easy project, a more wicked issue as we call them, what are some of the roadblocks that are preventing you from really doing what it is you wish to do? And go ahead and take a few minutes to just type in 1 or 2 words. We can't read a whole sentence, we can't read a whole paragraph, but 1 or 2 words would be great. So, and we're just going to fly through them a little bit, and as things pop up, we can read them. So we have time, prioritizing job duties. This is not top of my to-do list. Yeah. Time again, being new. Yeah, being new is always going to be an issue if you don't really have those skill sets, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Finances, lack of communication, resources. I wish to do face-to-face sessions, okay? Finding the key person in the community. That's a really good one. Trudy and I are going to talk about who are the gatekeepers and who are the power people, who has ultimate power to make decisions. Is it really worth your time and energy if the work that you're going to do isn't going to be able to be enacted or utilized by the community as a whole? Not knowing the best way to approach. Maybe we can give you some tips and tricks about that today. Pulled in too many directions. You guys all sound like extension professionals, that's for sure. Time, resources, and recruiting participants. Yeah, so as you can see, and the chat box is full of these, and you can go back and look through them, and you can flip through them if you'd like. It seems like there's a lot of the same stuff coming up: time, resources, lots of other commitments, lack of skills or lack of history in doing this type of work. So those are all very legitimate reasons that you might shy away from doing something like this. So then let's kind of feed off of that next question is, what is one thing or one situation that scares you about engaging in highly charged community issues? So when you think about what would be a highly charged community issue, maybe wanting to put in some sort of laws or some sort of building or development, or maybe taking away the rights of some sort of user group or something like that, things that are going to be, highly charged in a community issue. One of them we had here in our local Kansas City area a few years back was a fairly large intersection between two major highways. And there was a lot of conflict there about what should go on that, because you had a lot of folks that wanted to turn it into a beautiful green space. And then you had a lot of folks that said, it's along two major highways, you need to make it industrial. So those two clashes really, came out in public meetings. So some of the answers, we've got mediating conflict. Funders may be on the opposite side of the issue. That's very true. If somebody holds all the money and they're on the other side of the issue, jeopardizing funding. Scares, I'm a conflict avoider. I love that. You and me both. Yep. Sometimes it's easier just to walk away from that conflict, isn't it? Because you don't want anybody to get upset and be mad at you, even though it's not anything that you're doing. It's the process, or it's the situation itself. I am not scared. Think harm reduction with regards to substance abuse, but held back by fear of the controversy. Okay, very good. Being caught in the conflict personally. Ooh, that's a really good one. That's a great response in terms of why you wouldn't want to get involved, because somehow or another that might reflect negatively on you as a person or professionally, or that couldn't get all the voices at the table. Okay, that's a good, valid. Lack of knowledge. Pigeonholed to one side of the issue. And that's one of the things that Trudy and I are talking about too, is being that content neutral person. And she's got a few examples here later on talking about how she, as an extension professional, was viewed that way, and the county came and tapped into her, and she was able to successfully navigate those conversations. So I appreciate you folks sharing your information there. And like I said, flip through the chat box and read some of the other ones and know that you're not alone. I could probably identify with most of those myself personally as well. So with that, Trudy, let's turn it over to you and let's get started with the why.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. I don't know how many of you have ever read the book by Simon Sinek, and it is basically Start With Why. And so we wanted to spend just a few minutes here talking about an extension, because I know that it came up in the chat box. You have colleagues that may feel that way, and you may have elected officials and local decision makers that feel that way. Is why is Extension really getting involved in this? Extension is supposed to deliver education. So if education is a powerful tool, and but it does affect the quality of public decisions. And I think that's the why behind it, because education is important to make an informed decision. I think Extension is a good role for Extension because dialogue is important, getting the right people to the table. There's a slide Bruce will talk about here shortly, and it's kind of what I focused on when I was at National Association of Counties, is many times decision makers deal with the backlash from the decision they made, rather than getting input up front and having that dialogue up front before the decision is made. Innovative solutions, when you bring a variety of people to the table wearing different hats, different backgrounds, it's amazing the innovation that is there in looking at those solutions. And then I think finally it's important, and we do a lot of work at Kansas State University Research and Extension with this, with our new agents, is builds capacity within our system. And I always say, as community vitality is research-based, science-based, but we're about process more than content. So if you can kind of think about it that way, is you are using a proven process or a best practice process to bring people together. So I think that, and the why, the principle behind why, I'm just going to close with this, is nobody cares what you do or how you do it until they understand why you do it. So I think the why is provide education, opportunity for dialogue, creative solutions, and build capacity within our system. Bruce?
All right. Well, you caught me off guard, Trudy, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to be full disclosure. I'm reading through all these chats. There's some great answers. No, I'm serious. There's some great stuff in there. You folks written in there. Jeopardize funding, wanting to look, not wanting to creating controversy that negatively impacts extension. I mean, that's fantastic stuff. And you're exactly right. Those are all real issues that you have to be cognizant of when you make these decisions on how to move forward. And so hopefully we can give you some tools and some tricks or some ideas on how to, approach this, because this is real stuff that I'm sitting there reading all these, and these are great stuff. And it ties in right with my slide, because actually this type of work is part of our heritage. If you go back to 1934, 1935, the USDA formed an organization called the Program Study and Discussion Unit. And a part of that process was to enact farmers to go out, or actually educators to go out and work with local farmers to talk about the issues of the time. And it's actually kind of interesting when you go back and look at some of these farmers' bulletins, the issues back then are the exact same issues that we talk about today. Commodity prices, production processes, access to the needed supplies and the needed food and water and things like that. Those are all issues that we still address today. And so our organization, as a part of that USDA process, was right there in the middle, bringing these farmers together, bringing these families together to have these mediated discussions about the issues of the time. And so we're no stranger to that. It's part of our DNA as an organization, as an extension educators. And so throughout its history, we've just been part of that science-based, neutral content provider of information. And so we need to keep that in mind and not shy away from this stuff. So back to you, Trudy, in terms of the Extension Workers Creed.
Okay, Jeanette is going to put this link in your chat box so that you will have it, but I'm going to, just a minute here, to play this for you. And this came out of Texas AgriLife Extension, and I will warn you in the beginning, it's supposed to be silent, but you should have sound as it plays. You'll have sound shortly.
I believe in people and their hopes, their aspirations and their faith.
In their right to make their own plans and arrive at their own decisions.
In their ability and their power to enlarge their lives and plan to the happiness of those they love.
I believe
that education, of which extension is an essential part, is basic in stimulating individual initiative, self-determination, and leadership.
That these are the keys to democracy, and that people, when given facts they understand, will act not only in their self-interest, but also in the interest of society.
I believe
that education is a lifelong process, and the greatest university is the home. That my success as a teacher
is proportional to those qualities of mind and spirit that give me welcome entrance to the homes of the families I serve.
I believe in intellectual freedom to search for and present the truth without bias and with courteous tolerance towards the views of others.
I believe that extension is a link between the people and the ever-changing discoveries in the laboratories.
I believe in the public institutions of which I am a part.
I believe
in my own work and in the opportunity I have to make my life useful to humanity.
Because I believe in these things.
Because I believe these things.
Because I believe these things. I am an extension professional.
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 Okay, we want to thank Texas AgriLife Extension for that. And I don't know about you in your state, but in Kansas, we read that Extension Workers Creed before our ESP meetings, and I've read that at national ESP conferences before. But until I was putting together the slides for this presentation today, I don't think it ever resonated with me, but the one I love the best is when people are given the facts, I believe they will make decisions that are in the best interest of society. And I think that speaks to our role in becoming involved in these public issues as we move forward. So let's talk about, from extension standpoint and a community standpoint, who really does need to be involved. This is not work that as an extension agent you are going to do on your own. Local unit extension agents need to be involved. And I came from, in Kansas, an urban community. It's not an urban community in the United States, but it is for us. And, you know, when I wore my community vitality hat, I might be the process person, but it would be very important to bring the horticulture agent in if it was a local foods issue, or to bring the foods and nutrition agent in if it was access to food or nutrition or public health types of things. So I think that there is a role because for process as well as content. It's also really important to bring those local organizations that are involved, that have a stake in the issue to the table. I'll share an example. When I was in Douglas County, we had an issue, we called it the 5-acre exemption. It was basically a land use issue. And there was the preservation of farmland group on one side, and on the other group there were the property owners that had basically invested their lifetime earnings into land as a retirement fund. And so it was basically development versus not development. And when we went about that, we not only involved the Farm Bureau or the Livestock Association, but also those that were really the heritage, the land trust, which was a way to preserve land. We had to bring both together. This was an issue that the county commissioners, it came to their table about once every 5 years that it needed to be dealt with. I had a passion for it. And so we worked with the county commissioners, and we held public hearings, and other organizations held public hearings across the county ahead of when they made their decision. And those were publicly attended events, and then they made their decision. Previous to that, there'd be an issue. The director of zoning and codes would bring a solution to the county commissioners. The county commissioners would pass it, and then they would have about 3 meetings with the general public that was all upset with what they passed. Once we went through that process, and Bruce was in Douglas County when we went through that process, there was times I wanted to walk away, and I will tell you, I did my best to be non-biased, but I would not be truthful with any one of you if I said I didn't have a personal opinion, but I tried not to let that personal opinion show. But I think the biggest outcome of that was our zoning office, zoning and codes is what it was called in Douglas County at the time. There were employees in that office that when they came out to those public hearings, they had never, ever before been to that part of the county. And so there was a lot of goodwill built, as they came out, they learned a lot. But the commissioners at that time were so appreciative of Extension stepping up and handling that public hearing process for them so that they could, again, bring a group of people together to come up with some kind of a solution. And I think this quote at the bottom says it well, but it's enhanced when there is a coalition of organizations involved as you go about those decisions. That was really the one that I would say that was the issue I basically cut my teeth on in getting involved in this arena. And it couldn't have been a more scary time, but I couldn't have hoped for a better outcome after holding those. I think the next one is yours, Bruce.
Yes. So here's another activity. I seem to like to do the chat boxes, and I'm getting a lot of stuff from it. And so, you know, as representing the Kansas Association of Counties, there's a lot of overarching issues that impact or influence our counties on a day-to-day basis. You know, things that have to be dealt with, issues that have to be looked at and addressed. And back when I did a little bit of work with Trudy and I on this Master Community Facilitator training, we were able to actually classify or codify, if you will, those issues under these 5 umbrellas. And so access to healthy food, I know that's a huge issue right now, people having access to healthy food, both in the rural parts of the country as well as in some of the urban cores, just a little bit different scale, if you will. Access to affordable housing. Housing can be very hit and miss in some parts of the country. Access to reliable and consistent health care, water rights, both quality of water and also quantity of water, and then raising that next generation of leader. Around here in Kansas, that's, you know, a lot of the smaller, more rural parts of the state are getting even smaller by the day as our youth go off to college or go off to find another job and other employment elsewhere and leaving their hometown or their home areas behind. I bring that up because, you know, talking about what it is that Extension does, what we do as professionals, what you all do as professionals, what are some of the programs or some of the projects or some of the ways that you folks find yourself addressing these, what we're calling key county government issues? Take a few seconds and kind of throw them into the chat box, if you will, and see if we can keep up with you and read a few as we go through. So I got to scroll down here to the bottom. So helping to form and attending coalitions to deal with the issues. Yes, I think that's probably one of the hallmark ways that Extension has engaged in community activities like this, is to be a part of those coalitions and to be a part of those organizations that come together either by request of somebody or just by natural synthesis, if you will. The group just forms and starts to work together cooperatively. Working as a partner with local organizations to deal with these issues, okay, yep. Youth leaders. Ensure that youth doing good things to get positive press coverage. Now, yeah, that's true. In this day and age, it's kind of hard to find sometimes good positive things that kids are doing. I know they try to do that on the news a lot, recognize some of those outstanding kids, and I know there's a lot of great things that youth are doing these days. Sustainability of small communities, and there's a lot of different activities and discussions that can be had around that. Conduct grassroots advisory committee meetings, okay? Conflicts between the conventional and organic agriculture. Most definitely, yeah, being a horticulture extension educator at heart, I understand that argument very well. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we find ourselves doing to address these issues. And it seems like being at the table and making sure that we have a spot at the table. And what we're asking during this session is to maybe look at that a little bit different, and instead of just being at the table, to maybe convening the table yourself and being that person that brings these things together, to bring these groups and these people together. So with that, Tree, tell us about what is appropriate and how we do this.
Okay, Bruce, before I move to that one, I do want to give a couple examples related to these issues out of Kansas. And one of those is a culture of health initiative that we had. Yeah. And we did some training statewide. We had some seed money that we could do some community grants. And the reason I think that was very successful is because historically Extension has brought coalitions together. But actually taking the next step for that coalition to actually make an impact in the community, rather than 10 different organizations coming together on a monthly basis and just share what they're doing. Bring 10 organizations together on a monthly basis, identify a community issue that you want to address together or collectively, and then identify what the appropriate role for each of those organizations are. And then the other one, I know in Extension in many, many states, you have done a program what's called First Impressions, which is basically visiting a community. A team visits a community and makes recommendations. We've developed what we call youth community perceptions. And what the youth one jogged my memory on this, in that a team of youth go about their community and assess it, and then they actually go to the city council and give a report and make a recommendation for something to be adopted by the city council. And we've got lots of feedback that the city council are amazed that the youth are seeing some of the very same things that the adults wanted to happen in the community. So those are just a couple examples before we move forward. This is the slide. If you could take 1 out of 30 slides to remember, this is the one I want you to remember. You've heard me say this. We have 2 roles of what is appropriate to be involved in. One is to be a trusted source of information, and the other one is to be a process person. And this last one, attention to process as well as content. And these quotes at the bottom, I'll just say, they came out of that public issues. I talked about the PI document from about 25 years ago, and they came out of that. But remember, we can provide information, and we can be a process person. So what are those roles, or what might they be? And I just kind of want to go through these, and I want to say that you're probably not going to be playing all of these roles. And you are probably not going to announce to the group what role you're playing. But I think it's critical as we engage in this to be able to at least label for ourselves what is our role. One, you could be just simply the convener of a group of people and approach it that basically the solutions lie within the room. You're going to invite the people to the table, and whatever happens, happens. The next one, which Extension is very good at, is the program planner. And I think many times for coalitions to be successful and have an impact on their community, Extension is, we are good organizers. We've always been good organizers. And so that may be a role. You may play the role of actually facilitating those conversations. I'm going to give an example here a little bit later when I think kind of as a state we cut our teeth on this, and that was related to water, but we were playing a role of facilitator. You might be the information provider. You might be the analyst, and I think, interpreting the data for the people that are at the table, and potentially the forecaster. I would say of all of those, I think the forecaster is probably the least likely. I think convener, facilitator, and analyst, or interpreting the data for the people, are probably the roles that you're most likely going to play above and beyond our traditional role of providing good, sound information to the public. I think the next one is yours, Bruce.
So when is this type of work, when is it appropriate? When is it good to get engaged with the community, to bring folks to the table, to be a part of the process, and to work with them? So close your eyes and kind of think back. Have you been to a meeting of local decision makers as they deal with the fallout after a decision has already been made? Think back to a time when that has happened. What sort of issue was it? Was it a very contentious issue? Was it a very benign issue? Was it maybe an issue that still persists to this day, and there might even still be chasms between interest groups that can't be crossed, that can't be healed yet because the wounds are too fresh and too deep? But think about those types of situations. And I see a land use issue is typed into the chat box, and that's true. I mean, those types of issues will never go away, really, quite frankly. If somebody feels like they've been wronged, I say that for those of you that know the topography around here in Kansas City metropolitan area, we have a little oval called the Kansas Speedway. So for you folks that are NASCAR enthusiasts, that's just 4 miles from my house. And I can still take you, and that racetrack was built more than 20 years ago, and I can still take you to people that were relocated from that speedway being built, and they are still not happy that they were kicked off of their land 20 years later. And they got paid a pretty penny too, from the outsider looking in. So my point being is that sometimes those decisions, it's not good. Sometimes, things just don't ever heal, if you will. So now go back and imagine how that might look if the public had been engaged before the decision. Now, I realize that a lot of contentious decisions, I think probably, let's be honest, let's be truthful, they get made A, because of money, or B, they get made because if too much time and too much energy gets put into a controversial topic, no decision ever gets truly made and things persist, or they fall away by the wayside. I go back to that very valuable piece of land at the intersection of two highways here in my community, where they were approached kind of behind the scenes, under the table, to do a fairly large multi-million-dollar truck stop type development, if you will. And when that was announced, the public just went crazy because they felt like that land was too beautiful and too desirable for a community, that it needed to be rebuilt with houses and walking trails and shopping centers and things like that. And folks, it was a landfill that became a shopping mall, and the shopping mall was raised, and now you've got this big giant open space. And so, I mean, it's just time and time again, whenever they try to do something with that land, the public, comes up and fights it, I guess, if you will, because that land is still sitting there vacant. But if you could be a part of that process, and actually that's what they have done, is they've had these community conversations, and they asked for volunteers to be at the table to talk about the issues, and talk about the wants, the dreams, and the wishes, and that type of thing. And so they're actually taking input, but it's just a matter of trying to combine all of the voices at the table to come up with one master plan that seems to work for our community. But it certainly can be contentious, and that's why nothing ever gets done. So then you ask yourself, what is Extension's role in engaging the public before the decision is made? So where could you be a part of that process? And like Trudy was talking about the 5-acre exemptions, and she's going to talk about the water plan and some other issues where Extension has been at the table. What are some things that you folks as Extension professionals could be doing, and how you can engage the public? Is it either through educational opportunities? Is it through that mediation or facilitation skills that we're talking about using, and that type of thing? So just be thinking about that as we kind of go through the rest of this slide set.
And Bruce, as I transition to your next slide, one process I like to use there is could, should, will. What could we do as a community? What should we do as a community? And then the decision makers decide what will we do as a community. So I think, you're on a teeter-totter there between should and will.
That's actually really good. Put that in your notebook there, folks, because that is a good tool. It's very simple. It's easy. It can get a lot of good information and fosters a lot of good discussion. So getting from no to yes. So how communities can work together to address some of the public issues that we're talking about. So like Trudy said, like Simon Sinek said, start with the end in mind. what is it where is it we ultimately want to be? What is the ultimate goal for whatever it is that this discussion is about? Well, what's our community going to look like? What are the policies going to be? What's the funding structure going to be? Whatever it is, think about what does the end look like. Keep that in mind. And then start building those relationships. And, it's interesting here again, as I go back to the chats and talk about some of the things that you guys talk about, lack of time, a lack of resources, a lack of support by your board was one of the groups. And then also a very interesting one that I read was talking about fear of not being seen as the expert anymore, because you bring other people to the table and all of a sudden now you've got new experts and they don't need you anymore. Well, that's actually, a fear, but is it a reality? Are you really going to be cast by the wayside because, you bring so many other valuable tools to the table, and then make sure that you continue to bring those tools to the table. So, but build those relationships that you need to bring folks to the table. Mobilize the resources. What is it that you're going to need? Is it going to be time? Is it going to be energy? Is it going to be a people, specialist, whatever it is? And then focus on clarity, making sure that you're crystal clear in what is the mission of this group. What are we trying to accomplish? So many times you get sucked down into little rabbit holes and you start down a path and all of a sudden you're pulled in another direction or something else takes over. And pretty soon you're not really looking at the original topic that you were supposed to be focusing on. So make sure that you focus on the clarity.
Okay, so before you take on this role, and I'm not going to go through these one by one, but these are some things to really think about. And one is your personal skills. What are your personal skills in working with groups? And that's not a yes or no decision. It is, what are my skills and what might I need to enhance within my skill set to be able to become more comfortable in this type of work. When you look at the issue, what types of people are concerned about that issue, extension historically, and we need to be able to serve all and bring all people to the table. How many people are going to be affected by it? So it's kind of that a return on your investment. And then talking about that, I'm going to skip down to the next one. How much time can you invest in this concern? In Extension, we're good at one and done. We teach the program, we do the evaluation, we're done, we're on to the next one. This is not that type of work. It takes a time investment to do that. And when will those decisions be made? How can all your stakeholders be involved? And then again, before you start, it's that, what could we do? What should we do? What will we do? Who has the ultimate power to make the decision? Because that is the tipping point. We are not making the decision. We can make recommendations. And I think there's a slide coming up that will kind of talk about it, but ask yourself those questions. And if there are areas that you feel you need to enhance your skill set, reach out and do that. Or if you're saying, I'm in an office with 4 extension professionals and this is not my thing, but I think someone down the hall would be, go visit with them. So where is it appropriate? And I think that 3 levels. At the local level, whether it's the city, the town, the neighborhood association, I think that's a very appropriate way to get or entry point for it. At the county level, in working in Kansas, we call them townships, working with school districts. Some of us can remember when school consolidation was a big deal. Regional level, which could be multi-county or state. In Kansas and several other states, we have this underground aquifer, Ogallala Aquifer, and that is a multi-state, it's affected multi-state, and because of what I'll speak to in a minute of our getting involved in water, then for the last 2 years, we have been invited to Colorado and Texas to facilitate those conversations related to the Ogallala Aquifer. And I remember that our water quality specialist at Kansas, which is a deliver the science-based information to people, when we were going to have these facilitated conversations at one of those conferences, he's like, oh, Turdy, I just don't think that's going to work at all. And to this day, he talks about that was incredible. That was awesome to have conversations and basically bring people around to make an informed recommendation to those decision makers.
Mm-hmm.
So some appropriate and inappropriate. So overall, you can promote dispute resolution, encouraging collaborative programming, and facilitate consensus building. You know, what can we all live with? What you cannot do, and it's very, very simple, you cannot become an advocate. You can be an advocate for the issue, but you cannot become an advocate for one side or the other. And so once that happens, it's a very slippery slope. So you're an advocate for the issue, but you are not an advocate for the appropriate decision to be made out of that. So with that, Bruce, I think, yeah, I'm gonna turn it back over to Bruce, and he's gonna talk about a tool that we have in Kansas that Bruce developed, and it's not on the public domain. So if this is something you want to see and would like to see the information, my email is in the front of the slide set. You can send me an email and I'll be happy to share it with you. So Bruce?
Okay, so Trudy, before we jump in there, one of the participants has typed in, there's a great need in communities for this. You spoke earlier about the negative consequences of decisions made without including community voices. Those take more time and create more ill will in the long term. And there's absolutely no more truer statement that can be said about today's discussion than that. I mean, that wraps it all up, and that's what this is all about. This is about trying to find a way within your professional skill set to address the issues, you know, in a public forum, in a public way, to be a part of that conversation. Trudy, I don't know if you want to kind of dovetail onto that, or what are your thoughts when you read something like that or see something like that?
I will dovetail onto that. I agree with the comment, and what I would encourage you to do as an extension professional, if this is an arena that you would really like to get involved in, to identify some tools, but that, as important, develop a relationship with the decision makers in your community and find out from them what are some of the issues that they're going to be dealing with in the future. Have a conversation with them about how you could help them or engage in that. When I talked about the 5-acre exemption, because I had a passion for that issue, I reached out to the commissioners and the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Planning Commission and said, you know, extension could help with this. Would that be valuable? So don't wait for them to come to you. So I would say, or read the newspaper, see what the issues are, and pick up the phone and do that. But again, don't take a position. You are a process person other than providing research-based information. And it's really hard for one person to wear both hats. So I would encourage you to build on your colleagues. One of you be the provider of research-based information and the other one be the process person. Bruce?
All righty. So like Trudy said, you are the process person. So how can this be done? About 4 years ago, it was actually Trudy's idea, a suggestion, came to me and asked if I'd be interested in putting together a curriculum, a training program to teach volunteers the art of facilitation. And so having had experience with master gardeners and working with that curriculum, I decided to say yes. And here we are 4 years later, and we've got a program. They've got a program that has actually been utilized a few times, and hopefully it will continue to be utilized into the future. But let's talk a little bit more about the Master Community Facilitator Volunteer Program. So the next slide, Trudy. Yep, go ahead. So arguably, like I said, this again, facilitation skills, and I say this in the training, is a core competency. A core competency is something that an extension professional should be able to do or should do as part of their regular job duties or responsibilities. Just like you're an educator, just like you probably are very good writers, very good speakers, very good teachers, really being a very good facilitator probably should be added to that toolbox. Being able to be comfortable to stand in front of a room and bring out all the voices in that room. And sometimes probably you do this type of work and you don't even realize you're doing it. You've never been told that you're a good facilitator, or that you've never been told that this is what there's actual names or terminology, or there's actual methods that you're using just intuitively that are actually recognized as good facilitation skills and good facilitation methods. So it's kind of fun when you find out that, hey, I'm actually doing this stuff. I just didn't know it was labeled, if you will. So like I said, the Master Community Facilitator, nope, that's fine. The Master Community Facilitator program was patterned after the Master Gardeners. And so Trudy, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about the water talks here, and then we'll jump into what the program looks like.
Okay, when we identified this need, Extension Community Vitality was approached by the Kansas Department of Agriculture and the Kansas Water Office to provide facilitators for community conversations across the state related to water. The one on your right-hand side is Western Kansas, which in Western Kansas, it is a quantity problem. The one on the left is Eastern Kansas, and that is a quality problem. So we had two issues. They wanted to hold over 30 public hearings or conversations related to it, but didn't feel like they had the capacity or skills to do that. So they reached out to Extension, and I provided that opportunity to agents across the state, begged some of them to help with this. But what we found out was once they came to the table and facilitated those conversations, they suddenly realized this is fulfilling work. This is something that I want to increase my skill set in to be engaged in the future. And so it was a real positive, and it's amazing what it's led to. So Bruce?
Yeah, and so then that's where Trudy came up with the idea of, well, what happens if we train volunteers to do this type of work, and then manage them as you would a master gardener or a master food volunteer or somebody like that. And so that's what we decided to do. And so the training program was developed, and it's a kind of a flipped classroom format, if you will, where folks actually do a lot of the learning at home, which was actually kind of a novel idea until COVID-19 hit, and now we're all doing stuff from home. But this was kind of a novel idea. So we have a series of training videos to talk about how to facilitate. We have 3 interactive sessions where we actually learn and practice these models that we're using. And we use actual case studies to kind of mimic the reality of being involved in this type of work. And there's 7 total chapters. So let's go to the next slide, Trudy, because we're going to run out of time here. But we decided that we weren't going to address all of the issues across the state with the Master Community Facilitator Volunteer Program. We were only going to focus on these 5 umbrella issues. Remember, you've seen these once before. We call these the 5 grand challenges at Kansas State University. But global food systems, health, developing tomorrow's leaders, community vitality, and water. And so when a community has an issue, when a community wants to have a conversation or a discussion about one of these 5 topics, we can work with them to come up with a master facilitator to come out and work with the community to have those discussions. So the next slide, Trudy, if you will, please. So I talked about the different models. And so there are 3 models that we decided to use to help foster these conversations. There's a model called the World Cafe, and that's probably the most recognized, and you may not even know that that's what it's called, but a World Cafe model is where you come into the room and there's a series of tables set up throughout the room, and everybody kind of scatters around the table, and you're walked through a question or 2, and then everybody gets up and reshuffles and sits back down, and they're either asked the same question again with different folks, or they're asked another series of questions. And you do that a series of 2 or 3 times, and you just kind of are moving around the room, getting a different taste, getting a different flavor having different conversations with different people throughout the evening or throughout the event. That's called World Cafe. And you'll see several different variations of that. Then you have what are called another model that we're using, that we're able to use, that we train our volunteers to use, is called study circles. And study circles actually were used most recently out in Western Kansas to look at the juvenile justice system and to look at the issues that the system was having with access to the very heavily needed resources like interactive discussion groups, peer groups, after-school programs, things like that, all those issues that were affecting juvenile justice out in the western part of the state. And basically the way study circles work is you bring the community together and you basically start talking about the way the system is or the situation is right now, and you start asking them, okay, what sort of information, what sort of questions do you have, what sort of problems are you looking at, are you seeing that might be addressed? You gather up all that information, you share that back with the group, they come back together a month later or so, some sort of time frame later, and start looking at the information that they didn't have before, and they start learning about the issue, and they start building their knowledge base, and they start having interactive conversations, and you step them through and say, okay, now what sort of information do you need? What sort of problems are you seeing or addressing or thinking that you would like to learn more about? And you go back and find more information and so on and so forth. And you basically, you're stair-stepping their knowledge base up through to where at the very end, at the end of the study circle sessions, after 3 or 4, maybe 5 sessions, if you can get people to stay engaged that long, you have some sort of action step. You actually have a plan together that says, okay, this is where we started. These are the issues that we saw, we think we knew about, and this is where we actually are, and this is what we know needs to be done, and this is how we're going to get there. So it takes us a little bit of time, but it's a great way to build that capacity within your community. And then we have a series, the third and final one is called charrettes. And charrettes basically kind of build on one another. Charrettes is a little bit more of a visual type activity. Some people are auditory, some people are visual. For example, if you want to have a planning process where people actually can see things happening, that's what charrettes is. Charrettes is you put a piece of paper out on the table and ask them to draw a picture of the neighborhood supermarket, and then where would it be located in the community, and so on and so forth. And then you start building on that and moving things around, and it's kind of the people start feeding into one another. And at the end of the day, you've got this real nice product of what the community should look like, or what the event should look like, or whatever it is that you're addressing. And that's the way charrettes work.
Okay, so this last one, to summarize, because I think we're ending here shortly, is that, and this is kind of how I framed it for myself. If I walked into the State Association of Counties or the county commission meeting, and what would I like to hear them being discussed about extension? And I would like to hear them say they're an essential resource in our community, and they deliver research-based information, and they help people solve the problems at the local level. However, reality is, what would they actually say about cooperative extension? I remember many years ago, and I was not the director in Douglas County at the time, going to the county commission meeting, and we have 3 county commissioners in Douglas County, and I remember one of them say, well, what do you do all year when the fair's not going on? And we don't want to have them say that. So my philosophy here, and I want to close with this, is sometimes when the door is open, we are seen as an agricultural resource in a community. If that is what opens the door, walk through it, and then use that opportunity to share with those decision makers at the local level or the state level of what resources, what breadth of resources Extension has to assist people in solving wicked issues at their level. So with that, Jeanette, Bruce and I will answer any questions.
Trudy, there actually is a question. Talk a little bit more about what a process person is.
Okay, I will do that. A process person basically goes back. One of the ones is what Bruce talked about, those 3 different scenarios of how to, the charrette, study circles, and World Cafe, design that and facilitate that. Those of you on that know me, I'm a very goal person, and I'm a who's going to do what by when. So a process person basically works with a community and helps them. Just you're the lesson planner behind these events. You know, you help them select a process and then apply that process to come up with your desired outcomes. I know that Bethany's on, and they have some great resources in Michigan related to facilitation too. But a process person, you're not delivering content, you're not speaking at people. You are using tools to facilitate a process with the philosophy that the answers lie within the room. It's my responsibility to design a process that the best solutions will come to the top.
Yeah, let me add to that, Trudy, because that is so true, and that is actually one of the fears that you guys typed in earlier, not knowing enough about the topic of the subject. And being a process person, you don't need to know about building an airport to have a conversation about building an airport. You don't need to know, excuse me, that's what the experts are for. That's what the community is for. That's what they're there to do, is to provide that input. You're there just to make sure that everybody is playing nicely, that everybody's having an active part in the process, and they're having an active conversation, and all the voices are being heard.
Yeah, you know, Bruce, I always said when we started on the water talks in Kansas, I knew nothing about water. After participating in over 50 of those over the last 5 years, I maybe know a tenth of what you could know about water. And I'm not a water expert, never was, but the water experts were not process experts. So it took both to come to the table to design a process to engage the public.
That's exactly right.
Well, we have come to the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank Trudy and Bruce for presenting this most interesting and informative webinar. I would like to invite participants to, if you have further questions, you can stay on after we conclude today's session, and I'm sure Trudy and Bruce would be willing to answer those. Just a reminder, the webinar will be archived on the National ESP website. And I hope that you will join us for next month's professional development webinar entitled Demonstrating Collective Impact, Lessons Learned from a National Effort, and that is scheduled for June 23rd.
Nice.
Thanks to everyone for participating in today's webinar, and have a wonderful day. Stay safe and take care. Thanks again, Trudy and Bruce.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.